Okay, well, today we have a topic to deal with that's, I think, maybe the most important of all. Because if we're not successful in this particular area of our life, we will not be successful in any area of our life. And so, for that reason, what I have to say today has quite a bit to do with missionary work, but it has quite a bit to do with a person working in a located ministry or simply working at any job anywhere in life. And that is marital relationship and conflict resolution. Now, if we can't resolve conflict in our home, in our marriage with somebody that we love dearly, somebody that we are close to, somebody that we have every opportunity to talk with, we probably won't be able to resolve conflict in any area of our life. We'll flee from it or avoid it or be the cause of it. Probably that latter a lot of the times. So, I want to talk about conflict resolution, the sort of the personality issue that's involved with this, and specifically how it relates to our marriage relationship. Now, some of you perhaps are already married, others are still in the pre stage, not yet married, but I would imagine most of you are certainly open to that idea. Um, when I'm in a classroom and I have some students that are already married, I always begin by asking, I said, "Oh, okay, you're married? Yeah, good, great." And then I said, "Now, let me say, you're happily married." Well, yeah, usually they agree to that. So you've never, ever had any conflict, any difference of opinion, any discussions, anything like that, right? Right away, no, that's not the way it is. Um, because in every marriage relationship, there's going to be conflict. You cannot live in close union with someone else and not have differences of opinion. It just simply will not happen. Add to that fact something I've already mentioned, that men and women think very differently. We analyze very differently. Even if we come to the same conclusion, we took a different path to get there. And so we think differently, we have different values, we have different outlooks on life, all of that. And that affects significantly how we get along. Now, it is generally something that kind of works itself out. A little bit of rough spots here, but kind of works itself out. But most marriages, somewhere along the line, need a little bit of help from someone else. Kind of like your car needs to go in for an oil change and a tune-up every now and then. Traditionally, in the past, that came from grandparents, came from maybe the minister of your local church, close friends who are older than you are and have lived it and succeeded in getting through some of those rough spots in life, that type of thing. Nowadays, more and more, we're going to a professional counselor. Someone that's got a degree in it, that's their specialty. Hopefully, they do a better job than some of these other people did in the past. Sometimes they don't, unfortunately. But we'll probably need some sort of help every now and then from someone. It's just the way life is. God didn't intend for us to ever be an island unto ourselves, isolated. We were designed to live in community. And part of living in community is finding encouragement and help in others when maybe we don't know which way to turn ourselves. So, if we're going to talk about conflict resolution and personality issues specifically within the marriage relationship, where do we start? This is a subject that is a master's degree. It's a PhD degree. There's lots of people out there that have PhDs or master's degrees in marital conflict and conflict resolution and things of that nature. And so, how in the world am I going to deal with it in a 20-minute lecture? Well, I'm not. I'm going to give you an introduction. I'm going to throw out a few ideas and all that. There is a class here at the university on conflict resolution. I don't teach it. I actually would like to teach that class sometime. I think it would be a fun one to teach and a constructive one to teach. But at this point, I'm not the person who does it. I'm not around enough. So if you would like to get a class on conflict resolution, at least last time I checked, the handbook there for the school, there was one available. So you might want to check into it. If not, there are other places that offer it. And you can get it. I think a class or two in conflict resolution probably ought to be a requirement for everybody in every degree, because in every walk of life you're going to wind up with conflict. So in the marriage relationship, where do we start? Well, the issues usually boil down to one of a failing or shortcoming in the communication process itself, or in the comprehension of what has been communicated to you. In other words, I either don't do a very good job explaining myself, and most of us don't, or I don't do a very good job at hearing and listening and understanding, and probably none of us do there. It was said once that God gave us 2 ears, 1 mouth, because we should listen twice as much what we talk. And that's probably a pretty good rule of thumb in a marriage. Now you can figure out pretty quickly if that's happening. Maybe we're not going to do a whole lot of arguing because we're going to do a lot more listening. And if we do a lot more listening, a lot of times, simply by comprehending the concerns and the issues that my spouse is dealing with and concerned about, a lot of times will go a long ways towards assuaging the conflict, the irritation that comes as we try to get along. So let me throw out a few principles. First, if you do wind up talking to somebody outside of your marriage about some sort of an issue you have within the marriage, it should be somebody that is worthy of absolute confidence. In other words, they're not going to be out gossiping and spreading your problems all over the community. That certainly happens often enough, and you don't want that. It should be somebody that is impartial. They're not going to be your lawyer or your advocate, nor are they going to be your husband's, but they're going to be outside of the issue and to try to help mediate and resolve it. A person like that can do it. It is better if they have some training in it, because that will or should assure that they've had a little bit of practice and a little bit of experience, and should be a whole lot better prepared to be able to help you. So look in those areas to get started. After that, how do we do it? Well, first of all, as I mentioned, we are notoriously poor listeners. I think that's true of just about all of us. We hear something, what do? Right away, we're listening to something, discussion over here, a political argument, a religious debate, whatever. And what are we doing? We're listening and we're thinking about how to respond, right? We kind of want to come up with that perfect answer, that great comeback, something like that. Maybe that's part of the debate format. It usually isn't a very good part of the communication and comprehension model. And so we have to genuinely listen. So I've got a few, sort of parameters here that I want to share. And I'm going to talk about, 2 different formats here. One is the initiator, and the other is the receptor, or the inquirer, as some people have called it, and how that works. Now, if there's something in your marriage that's bothering you, you have a couple of options. One is just let it go. And in some cases, that's best. It might not be all that important. And if it's not all that important, a day or 2 down the road, it's past. You forgot about it. No big deal. So if you don't need to have a fight about it, don't fight. I always kind of jokingly say to a married couple, it's a whole lot more fun to make love than it is to make war. And I think that's true. So why don't you spend a whole lot more time making love and not making war so much? So how do we do that? Well, if it isn't a critical issue to you, drop it, leave it, forget about it, and it'll go away after a while. Every person needs to know what is really important to me, what is critical to me, what are my needs, what do I have to be able to live comfortably and at peace. Be honest with yourself. Is this really a need that I have, or is this simply something I want, something I'd like, something that out of my fickle nature I've latched onto? And if it's not a critical need, then you're best off just saying, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to get uptight about it. I'm going to just let it go. He's that way or she's that way, whatever the case is. That's okay. We're different. Now, after you have decided, I have certain issues that are critical that I have to have, that I simply can't get along without. And once we know what those are and we've identified them, then if an issue comes up and the problem has continued more than just an occasional appearance, you need to talk about it. You need to work it out. You need to try to resolve it. And so as you're working to try to resolve these issues, what do? Well, first of all, you talk and you express your feelings and your thoughts. You want to say, I feel, or I think, or it seems to me, or something. You keep it that way because very few things in this life are absolute. I've already talked about, you see something go on and you have 3 or 4 people there, they're going to have 3 or 4 different impressions of what happened. That doesn't mean they're lying or not telling the truth. It doesn't mean they're fabricating things. We speak emotionally. And so if something impresses me significantly, wow, I'm going to talk about it like it's a big deal. Somebody over here sees the same thing, it's no big deal, and it just nothing over there, just happened. So obviously we're going to have a different opinion. So if I'm going to talk, I should talk about what I feel and what I think and what's bothering me. And I should keep it on that personal initial level. I should be willing to talk about my fears, what makes me sad, what hurts me, what maybe gives me a guilt trip. And when I talk about a problem, it's an expression of me and of who I am. It's not necessarily their fault. It's not necessarily their issue. A lot of times it's me. But for me to be able to live in communion, somehow this has to be dealt with. And I kind of need your help for that. So if we look at it that way, where we're looking for somebody to help us with one of our issues, then it's not me against that person. It's not him against her. It's 2 people working to solve a problem. Now, when you do this, be very careful to avoid blaming and accusing, and certainly be careful to avoid name calling. As soon as you start saying, it's your fault, you did it, you caused this problem, what's going to happen? The other person's going to put up their shield, and they're going to get out their sword too, and the war is going to start. You're not going to solve the issue very often that way. You're going to simply increase the conflict. So you don't need to blame anyone. You can just say, this is going on, and I need some help with it. Use this as a time for self-discovery. Use it to probe into your inner being, into your heart. Why do I feel this way? Well, maybe it's something back from childhood. Maybe your parents were very critical, or maybe they're very strong, extremely strong disciplinarian or something, and it's affected you. Sometimes there has been abuse of some sort, and that has marked the person. And so they're ultra sensitive to certain things. Well, it's not then the spouse's fault, it's that ultra sensitivity. But they need to work with their spouse so that that ultra sensitive part of themselves is not being constantly irritated and provoked and all that. Now, if the spouse can hear all this and listen to it, pay attention, and understand what's going on, it starts opening up highway to resolution, to comprehension, to all that. So we ought to go about this in a way that we can do this. Now, I don't have too much time here, so I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as I can. Remember, I said I'm just going to give you an introduction. I'm not going to try and teach you a class in conflict resolution. I just can't do it here. Now, what do you do if you are the person who didn't initiate? Your spouse is talking to you. They have an issue. He or she has an issue. And you're, as a person who loves them, anxious to see that it be resolved. You approach it from that model. Already you're sitting there saying, well, she has a problem or he has a problem. How can I help with it? Well, that kind of sets the conflict off to the side and puts you in the position of being a helper. You need to be an effective listener to start out. You know, a lot of times somebody just wants to be heard. They just simply want to be understood. And even more critical than agreeing with them, they want to feel that my opinion has value. The way I understand things has worth. Because that means I have value and I have worth. And so when your spouse begins to say, I've got this problem, this issue's coming up, this is going on, you know, all that, first of all, listen. Just pay attention. You don't need to be answering. In fact, if anything, stimulate him or her to talk more. If it kind of gets to stop and she's waiting for your comeback, just say, you know, I'm not quite sure I understand. Do you mean that you feel this way? And try to maybe repeat what she said to give her the idea or him the idea that, yes, I did understand. Or, no, I didn't understand. Explain it a little bit better. Explain it. Help me to see where you're coming from. So if we get onto this and start listening better, we can use this as a time to learn more about our spouse. I say each one of you should have a PhD in your spouse, in him or her. What's a PhD? That's where you've done research. That's where you've come to understand from your own investigation what's going on here. So work on getting your PhD in your spouse. Learn how to read them, how to understand them, how to interpret their feelings, how to delve into that inner part of their heart that they don't normally share with everybody. And you're privileged at that moment to be allowed into that deep personal spot within their life. Try to remember it's not your problem. It's a problem that you have the privilege of trying to help resolve. And if you see it as it's not my problem, it's her problem or it's his problem, and they're coming to me for help in resolving it, everybody wants to be a helper, right? I want to help people out. I'm sure you do too. So use this as an opportunity to do that way. Try to be empathetic. Try to express an understanding of their hurt, of their sensitivity, of their concern. Now, that doesn't always mean you agree with it, but it does mean that you're understanding where they're coming from and why they're saying what they're saying. Now, as you do all this and go back and forth, probably going to find out some of those issues are solved just by talking about them. Others of them need some sort of change or intervention or activity on your part, maybe, and that's okay, and all. Now, you'll probably find out that if you express your concerns in this manner, your spouse is going to be more willing to listen and more willing to try to help you resolve them. But if, as the person who's the listener today has an issue tomorrow, if they have already listened, if they've already been helpful, then they'll find that that comes back. And their spouse is now in that same position of being willing to listen, being willing to try to be more helpful, and all that kind of stuff. So what I'm proposing here is that we look for a model where it's not conflict. It's not me against you. It's not him against her. It's two people trying to say, how can we work together? How can we solve this issue between the two of us? What can I do to help? What are my spouse's needs? And how can I provide for them? And she for him. And if we're both looking to try to make the marriage better, if we're both working to try and find ways to resolve it, if we're both being very careful to avoid accusations and assigning blame and certainly name calling, and a lot of marriages have had times when we said things we probably wish we hadn't. I know I have. And so we try to avoid that as much as possible. You know, you can change a lot of things in this world, but one thing you can't change is what you've said. And after you've said something, there's no way to take it back. And there was a time or two I said things to my wife that hurt her. And no matter how much I apologized, I could never take those back. And those things probably always resounded in her ears, and vice versa. So while we probably can't ever avoid that 100%, we certainly can work to minimize it. And we can be very careful. You know, James says, who can control their tongue? If they can control their tongue, they're perfect and they can control everything. And then he goes on with all his teaching about, the forest fire and the rudder on the boat and all that kind of stuff. And that's true. Certainly controlling your tongue is an issue. It's something you need to work on, because the tongue is a reflection or an expression of your heart. And so if you work on controlling the one, it'll help you stay in control of the other. And it'll help you then to work to smooth out things as opposed to exacerbate them. Paul says, don't let any corrupt or corrosive word come out of our mouth, but only that which is good and helpful. And if you make sure you never speak a corrosive word, an irritating word, but you speak only that which is helpful and agreeable and pleasant to the ear, that'll transform you, and it'll transform your marriage. Okay. Hopefully that's a little bit of help. Remember, it's just the tiniest of an introduction to an incredibly complex and rich subject that's worth more study. God bless. We'll talk to you in the next class.